They weren't just criminals, they were kings of the underworld, ruthless, untouchable, feared by millions. They built empires from the shadows, turning crime into a business and murder into an art. From the bloody streets of Chicago to the hidden backrooms of New York, these men ruled America with an iron fist, and when they fell hard. But before their empires crumbled, they became legends. Al Capone, the brutal mastermind who turned prohibition into his personal gold mine. Lucky Luciano, the genius who built the modern mafia and played the U.S. government like a puppet. Frank Costello, the politician in a gangster's suit, controlling America without ever firing a shot. Carlo Gambino, the quiet puppet master who ruled without ever setting foot in prison. And John Gotti, the flashy, fearless Teflon Don who took the mafia into the spotlight and paid the ultimate price. This is the story of the 5 most powerful mafia bosses who ruled America, and how their own power destroyed them. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear is the truth behind the legends. Al Capone, the most notorious mafia boss in American history. Alphonse Gabriel Capone, better known as Al Capone, was born on January 17, 1899, in Brooklyn, New York, to Italian immigrant parents. Growing up in a tough neighborhood, he was exposed to street gangs at an early age. Capone dropped out of school after striking a teacher at the age of 14 and soon became involved in petty crime. His first step into organized crime came when he joined the 5 Points Gang, a powerful street gang in New York City. During his early years in the gang, Capone worked under the mentorship of Johnny Torrio, a respected mobster who saw potential in the young man. Capone also worked at the Harvard Inn, a bar owned by gangster Frankie Yale, where he earned his famous scars in a bar fight, giving him the nickname Scarface. By his early 20s, he had established a reputation for being both ruthless and intelligent, key qualities for success in the underworld. When Johnny Torrio moved to Chicago to work for mob boss James Big Jim Colosimo, he later invited Capone to join him. Capone arrived in Chicago in 1919 and quickly became Torrio's trusted right-hand man. Chicago at the time was a city ripe for organized crime, especially with the introduction of Prohibition, which banned the sale of alcohol. With alcohol becoming illegal, the demand for it surged, creating a lucrative market for those willing to break the law. Torrio and Capone seized this opportunity, setting up a network of illegal breweries, speakeasies, and smuggling operations. In 1925, Torrio was seriously wounded in an assassination attempt by rival gangsters. Deciding to retire, he handed control of the Chicago outfit to Capone, making him the most powerful crime boss in the city at the age of just 26. Under Capone's leadership, the organization expanded its operations, controlling illegal alcohol distribution, gambling, and prostitution. Despite his criminal activities, Capone portrayed himself as a businessman and even a philanthropist, often donating to charity and helping struggling families during the Great Depression. Capone ruled Chicago with an iron fist, using bribery, intimidation, and extreme violence to maintain control. His wealth and power allowed him to corrupt law enforcement, politicians, and even the media, which often painted him as a modern-day Robin Hood. However, behind the scenes, he was orchestrating murders, bootlegging operations, and widespread racketeering. His enemies often met violent ends, either shot in public assassinations or eliminated in gangland slayings. One of the most infamous incidents associated with Capone was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Valentine's Day Massacre on February 14, 1929. In a brutal attempt to eliminate his main rival, George Bugs Moran, Capone ordered his men to disguise themselves as police officers and ambush members of Moran's gang. The fake officers lined up 7 of Moran's associates in a garage and executed them with machine guns. Although Capone was never directly linked to the massacre, It cemented his reputation as a ruthless crime lord. Despite his power, Capone's downfall began when federal authorities, led by Eliot Ness and his team known as the Untouchables, intensified their efforts to take him down. While Capone had managed to evade prosecution for violent crimes, the government found a way to convict him on tax evasion charges, a strategy also used against other mobsters. In 1931, after years of investigation, Capone was convicted and sentenced to 11 years in prison. Initially, he was sent to Atlanta U.S. Penitentiary, but was later transferred to Alcatraz, the infamous high-security prison off the coast of San Francisco. Alcatraz was designed to break the power of organized crime figures, and Capone quickly found himself isolated from his network. While in prison, his health deteriorated due to syphilis, which he had contracted years earlier. The disease affected his mental faculties, and by the time he was released in 1939 for good behavior, he was a shadow of his former self. After his release, Capone retreated to his mansion in Palm Island, Florida, where he lived out the rest of his days in poor health. He suffered from dementia and had the mental capacity of a child in his final years. On January 25, 1947, he died of a heart attack at the age of 48. Al Capone's legacy is a complex one. While he was one of the most feared and powerful crime bosses in American history, he also cultivated an image of a charitable man who helped the poor. His name remains synonymous with the Prohibition era and organized crime, and he has been portrayed in countless books, movies, and television series. Despite his downfall, his reign in Chicago left a lasting impact on the criminal underworld, shaping the future of the American Mafia. Charles "Lucky" Luciano, the architect of the American Mafia. Charles "Lucky" Luciano was born Salvatore Lucania on November 24, 1897, in Sicily, Italy. His family immigrated to the United States in 1906, settling in New York's Lower East Side. Growing up in a rough neighborhood filled with gangs and crime, Luciano quickly adapted to street life. Unlike many immigrants who worked hard for low wages, Luciano sought power and wealth through criminal activities. As a teenager, he ran small-time rackets, such as extorting money from Jewish kids by offering them protection from beatings, though he later befriended Jewish gangsters like Meyer Lansky and Benjamin "Bugsy" Siegel. These early connections would become instrumental in his rise to power. Luciano dropped out of school and joined the 5 Points Gang, a violent and influential street gang in New York. By the early 1920s, he was working for Giuseppe "Joe the Boss" Masseria, one of the most powerful mafia bosses in the city. During Prohibition, Luciano became heavily involved in bootlegging, supplying illegal alcohol across New York and beyond. He built alliances with Italian, Jewish, and Irish criminals, something traditional mafia bosses resisted. His ability to think beyond ethnic boundaries set him apart from older crime figures and made him one of the most powerful gangsters in the city. In 1929, Luciano's luck almost ran out when he was kidnapped, beaten, stabbed, and left for dead on Staten Island. However, he survived, earning him the nickname "Lucky," though some say the name predated the attack. Many believe the incident was orchestrated by rival criminals, but Luciano never revealed who was responsible. By the early 1930s, tensions in the mafia were boiling over. The old-school bosses, led by Masseria and his rival Salvatore Maranzano, were locked in a war known as the Castellamarese War. Luciano saw this as an opportunity. Instead of picking sides, he plotted to eliminate both leaders. In 1931, he arranged for Masseria's assassination while the boss was eating dinner at a restaurant. Luciano then pretended to ally himself with Maranzano, only to have him murdered just months later. With both old bosses gone, Luciano restructured the mafia, creating the Commission, a governing body for organized crime in America. He divided New York's mafia into 5 families to prevent further power struggles and ensure a more business-oriented approach to crime. This move revolutionized the mafia, turning it from a collection of warring gangs into a sophisticated criminal empire. Luciano's organization controlled bootlegging, gambling, drug trafficking, and prostitution, bringing in millions of dollars annually. He worked closely with other crime figures, including Vito Genovese, Frank Costello, Meyer Lansky, and Bugsy Siegel, to expand their operations across the country. Despite his enormous influence, he maintained a relatively low profile compared to flamboyant gangsters like Al Capone. However, in 1936, Luciano's empire was threatened when Thomas Dewey, a determined prosecutor, went after him for running a massive prostitution ring. Even though Luciano denied involvement, witnesses testified against him, leading to a 30 to 50-year prison sentence. He was sent to Dannemora prison, a harsh facility known as Siberia due to its brutal conditions. While in prison, Luciano's influence remained strong. He still controlled mafia operations through intermediaries, and his power never truly faded. During World War II, the U.S. government struck a secret deal with him, known as Operation Underworld. Authorities needed mafia connections to secure the New York docks from possible Nazi sabotage, and Luciano helped in exchange for favors. After the war, the government deported Luciano to Italy in 1946, despite his efforts to stay in the U.S. However, he continued to run his criminal empire from abroad, maintaining influence over American mafia operations. He also played a role in expanding the international heroin trade, establishing drug routes between Italy, Cuba, and the United States. In 1947, he attempted to set up a major casino operation in Havana, Cuba, with the help of Lansky. However, pressure from the U.S. government forced Cuban authorities to expel him. Luciano returned to Italy, where he remained under constant police surveillance. On January 26, 1962, Luciano died of a heart attack at Naples International Airport. Ironically, he was there to meet with a film producer discussing a movie about his life. Despite being a deported criminal, his body was later allowed back into the United States, where he was buried in St. John's Cemetery in Queens, New York. Luciano's legacy remains one of power, innovation, and ruthlessness. He transformed the mafia into a corporate-style organization, eliminating the chaos that plagued earlier crime families. His creation of the Commission and his business-minded approach to organized crime allowed the mafia to flourish for decades. Even today, his influence can be seen in the way modern crime syndicates operate. Frank Costello, the Prime Minister of the Underworld. Frank Costello, one of the most influential mafia bosses in American history, was born Francesco Castiglia on January 26, 1891, in Calabria, Italy. His family immigrated to the United States when he was just 4 years old, settling in the crime-ridden neighborhoods of East Harlem, New York. Growing up, Costello quickly became involved in street gangs, engaging in petty thefts and extortion. Unlike many of his peers, however, he combined intelligence, charisma, and diplomacy with his criminal activities, which later earned him the title, the Prime Minister of the Underworld. As a teenager, Costello joined the 104th Street Gang, working his way up in the criminal world by running minor rackets. He was arrested multiple times for theft, assault, and carrying a concealed weapon, but these early run-ins with the law only made him more cautious and strategic in his operations. Unlike many gangsters of his time, Costello focused on maintaining political connections and business ventures rather than engaging in excessive violence. During Prohibition in the 1920s, Costello saw an opportunity to make serious money. He partnered with Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, and Benjamin Bugsy Siegel to build a massive bootlegging empire. He aligned himself with the Morello crime family, which would later evolve into the Genovese crime family. Costello played a crucial role in securing illegal liquor shipments, running speakeasies, and controlling distilleries across New York. His ability to bribe police officers, politicians, and judges allowed him to operate without much interference. By the early 1930s, the old-school mafia bosses were being replaced by younger, business-oriented leaders. Costello, along with Luciano and Lansky, orchestrated the elimination of Joe Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano during the Castellamarese War, allowing Luciano to become the head of the New York Mafia. Costello was given significant control over the family's operations, particularly in gambling, a business he would perfect over the years. Unlike most gangsters, Costello preferred influence over brute force. He built close ties with New York politicians, judges, and law enforcement, ensuring that the mafia's operations ran smoothly. He was a master of bribery, securing favors from officials at every level. He also expanded his criminal empire into legal and semi-legal ventures, including slot machines, horse racing, and casinos. His gambling operations stretched from New York to Louisiana, Florida, and even Las Vegas, making him one of the wealthiest crime figures of his time. After Luciano was imprisoned in 1936 for prostitution charges, Costello took over much of his business operations. When Luciano was deported to Italy in 1946, Costello became the official boss of the Luciano crime family, which was later renamed the Genovese crime family. Under his leadership, the family flourished, focusing on illegal gambling, loan sharking, and labor racketeering. He continued to strengthen his relationships with politicians, earning him protection from law enforcement. Despite his power, Costello faced serious challenges in the 1950s. His rival, Vito Genovese, who had spent years waiting for an opportunity to reclaim control of the family, sought to eliminate him. In 1957, Genovese ordered an assassination attempt on Costello, which took place in the lobby of Costello's apartment building. The hitman, Vincent Chin Gigante, fired a shot that grazed Costello's head but failed to kill him. After the failed attempt, Costello decided to retire from active leadership rather than risk further attacks. Following his retirement, Costello handed over control of the family to Vito Genovese, but remained a respected and influential figure within the mafia. He continued to operate behind the scenes, serving as a key advisor and mediator in mafia affairs. His influence extended into politics, real estate, and business, ensuring that his wealth and power remained intact. Despite multiple investigations and court appearances, Costello never spent a significant amount of time in prison. His ability to navigate the legal system, combined with his deep-rooted connections, made him nearly untouchable. However, in 1961, he was convicted of contempt of court and sentenced to a year in prison. This was one of the few times he faced any real consequences for his criminal activities. In his later years, Costello distanced himself from the mafia's violent operations, choosing instead to focus on business and investments. He lived a quiet life in Manhattan, rarely making public appearances. On February 18, 1973, he died of a heart attack at the age of 82. Unlike many of his contemporaries who were either murdered or imprisoned, Costello died a free man. Frank Costello's legacy is unique among mafia bosses. He was known more for his political influence and financial empire than for ordering hits or engaging in gang wars. He helped shape the modern mafia, transforming it into a corporate-like organization that prioritized money and political power over bloodshed. His strategic thinking and ability to bribe his way to the top made him one of the most successful and enduring figures in the history of organized crime. Carlo Gambino, the quiet Don who built an empire. Carlo Gambino, one of the most powerful and influential mafia bosses in American history, was born on August 24, 1902 in Palermo, Sicily. Coming from a family with deep mafia ties, he was introduced to the world of organized crime at an early age. In 1921, at just 19 years old, Gambino immigrated to the United States, arriving in New York City, where he quickly became involved in the growing underworld of Italian-American organized crime. Upon his arrival, Gambino joined the D'Aquila crime family, which later evolved into the Mangano crime family. He gained a reputation for being low-profile, intelligent, and ruthless when necessary. During Prohibition, 1920 to 1933, he made a fortune by smuggling and selling illegal alcohol. He formed strong alliances with rising crime figures such as Lucky Luciano, Frank Costello, and Albert Anastasia, which played a crucial role in his rise to power. As the mafia's structure evolved, Gambino remained patient and strategic. In 1931, after the assassination of Joe Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano, Lucky Luciano restructured the American mafia by creating the Commission, a governing body designed to mediate disputes between crime families. Gambino's alliances with Luciano and Vito Genovese helped him establish himself as a powerful figure within the organization. For years, Gambino worked under Vincent Mangano, the head of what would later become the Gambino crime family. However, tensions within the family escalated when Mangano became suspicious of Albert Anastasia, his underboss, who was aligned with Gambino. In 1951, Mangano disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and Anastasia took control of the family, appointing Gambino as his second-in-command. Anastasia, known for his violent tendencies, was the head of Murder, Inc., a notorious mafia hit squad responsible for hundreds of assassinations. Gambino remained in Anastasia's shadow for years, but he was quietly waiting for his opportunity. By the mid-1950s, Vito Genovese and other powerful mobsters wanted Anastasia removed due to his reckless nature. Gambino, always the strategist, sided with Genovese in a secret plot to eliminate Anastasia. On October 25, 1957, Anastasia was assassinated while sitting in a barber's chair at the Park Sheraton Hotel in Manhattan. With Anastasia out of the way, Gambino became the new boss of the family, which was soon renamed the Gambino crime family. Under Gambino's leadership, the family expanded its control over illegal gambling, loan sharking, drug trafficking, labor unions, and extortion. Unlike other bosses who craved media attention, Gambino followed a low-profile approach, preferring to operate behind the scenes. He avoided flamboyant displays of wealth and never allowed himself to become the target of law enforcement. In 1957, shortly after taking power, Gambino attended the Appalachian Meeting, a secret gathering of top mafia bosses from across the country. The meeting, however, was raided by the police, exposing the mafia's national network to law enforcement. While many bosses were arrested, Gambino managed to escape the legal consequences. However, the incident put a spotlight on organized crime, leading to increased FBI scrutiny. Despite this, Gambino continued to consolidate power. In 1962, Vito Genovese, who had once helped him take power, was convicted of drug trafficking and sent to prison. This allowed Gambino to rise as the most powerful boss in the commission, effectively controlling the mafia's national operations. One of his most significant moves was eliminating rival bosses and internal threats. He had Tommy Lucchese, a close ally, take control of the Lucchese crime family, ensuring mutual cooperation between the two families. Meanwhile, he ordered the murder of Joe Colombo, head of the Colombo crime family, after Colombo attracted too much media attention. Gambino believed that mafia bosses should remain in the shadows, avoiding unnecessary publicity that could bring law enforcement pressure. Gambino's empire extended far beyond New York. He controlled labor unions, allowing him to extort businesses and construction companies. He also had influence in Las Vegas, Florida, and even South America, ensuring that his operations remained highly profitable. His wealth was immense, with his organization pulling in hundreds of millions of dollars per year. Despite his criminal empire, Gambino avoided major legal troubles. Unlike mobsters such as Al Capone or John Gotti, who were high-profile targets, Gambino kept a low-key and disciplined lifestyle. He preferred to live modestly in his Staten Island home, avoiding excessive luxuries or unnecessary public appearances. In 1971, Gambino suffered a significant loss when his underboss and longtime ally, Agnello Della Croce, was convicted of tax evasion. However, Gambino's organization remained stable due to its structured leadership. His ability to eliminate threats before they became serious problems ensured his dominance for decades. As he aged, Gambino began preparing for a peaceful transition of power. Unlike many bosses who faced violent ends, he handpicked his successor, Paul Castellano, to take over the family after his passing. Castellano was a businessman-like gangster who shared Gambino's belief in maintaining a low profile. However, this decision angered Agnello Della Croce's faction, leading to future conflicts within the Gambino family. On October 15, 1976, Carlo Gambino died of a heart attack at the age of 74 at his home in Massapequa, Long Island. Unlike most mafia bosses, he never served a day in prison for his crimes. His funeral was attended by hundreds of associates, and he was buried at St. John's Cemetery in Queens, New York. Gambino's legacy remains one of patience, intelligence, and strategic brilliance. He transformed the Gambino crime family into the most powerful mafia organization in the United States, a status it held for decades. His belief in discretion over violence allowed him to die peacefully, something few mobsters ever achieved. Though later leaders like John Gotti would destroy his vision by attracting too much attention, Gambino's reign remains a blueprint for how a mafia boss can rule without self-destruction. John Gotti, the dapper Don who took the mafia into the spotlight. John Gotti, one of the most infamous and flamboyant mafia bosses in American history, was born on October 27, 1940, in the Bronx, New York. He was the fifth of 13 children in a poor Italian-American family that struggled to make ends meet. At an early age, Gotti gravitated toward the streets, idolizing the gangsters in his neighborhood and quickly immersing himself in a life of crime. As a teenager, Gotti became involved with local street gangs and carried out small-time thefts and robberies. By his early 20s, he was deeply involved with the Gambino crime family, the most powerful mafia organization in the country. He ran with the Fulton Rockaway Boys, a gang that committed truck hijackings at Kennedy Airport. In 1968, he was caught stealing merchandise and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Though he served time, his reputation in the mafia grew. By the 1970s, Gotti had proven himself as a capable enforcer and a loyal soldier. He worked under Carmine Fatico, a capo in the Gambino family, and became close to Agnello Neil Della Croce, the family's feared underboss. Della Croce, known for his old-school mafia values, mentored Gotti and saw potential in his aggression and leadership abilities. In 1973, Gotti committed his first known mafia-sanctioned hit. He was ordered to kill James McBratney, a rival gangster who had kidnapped and murdered the nephew of Gambino boss Carlo Gambino. Gotti, along with 2 associates, executed McBratney inside a Staten Island bar. Though he was later arrested for the crime, he served only 2 years in prison due to a plea deal. The successful hit increased his status within the Gambino organization. After his release, Gotti continued rising in the ranks. By the early 1980s, he became the capo of the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club, a crew within the Gambino family that operated in Queens. However, tensions within the organization began brewing after Paul Castellano took over as boss following Carlo Gambino's death in 1976. Unlike Gambino, who valued traditional mafia values and secrecy, Castellano ran the family like a corporate business. He focused more on white-collar crimes rather than traditional rackets like extortion and drug dealing, which alienated many within the family. Gotti, who was still loyal to Della Croce, despised Castellano's leadership. When Castellano refused to visit Della Croce on his deathbed in 1985, Gotti saw it as an act of disrespect. After Della Croce died in December 1985, Gotti decided to take action and overthrow Castellano. On December 16, 1985, Gotti orchestrated one of the most famous mob hits in history. As Paul Castellano and his underboss, Thomas Bellotti, arrived at Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan, Gotti's hitmen gunned them down in broad daylight. The assassination was a public and brutal execution, signaling a shift in mafia leadership. Just days later, Gotti declared himself the new boss of the Gambino crime family. Unlike previous bosses who preferred to operate in secrecy, Gotti embraced the spotlight. He became known as the Dapper Don because of his expensive suits, flashy lifestyle, and charm. He openly flaunted his wealth, attending high-profile events, dining at exclusive restaurants, and mingling with celebrities. Despite his notoriety, Gotti managed to evade conviction multiple times in the late 1980s. His ability to beat charges earned him another nickname, the Teflon Don, because nothing seemed to stick to him. He was acquitted in 1986, 1987, and 1990, largely due to jury tampering, witness intimidation, and corrupt lawyers. However, while the media celebrated his ability to escape the law, the FBI and federal prosecutors intensified their efforts to bring him down. Gotti's downfall began in 1991 when his underboss, Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano, turned against him. Gravano had been Gotti's closest confidant, but after realizing that Gotti was blaming him for many of the family's crimes, he decided to cooperate with the FBI. This was unprecedented in mafia history. Never before had a high-ranking boss's right-hand man turned state witness. With Gravano's testimony and hours of secret FBI recordings of Gotti discussing crimes, the government had all the evidence it needed. In 1992, Gotti was convicted on charges of murder, racketeering, and obstruction of justice. On June 23, 1992, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was sent to United States Penitentiary, Marion, a high-security prison where he spent most of his time in solitary confinement. Even in prison, he remained a powerful figure, continuing to influence the Gambino family through visitors and secret messages. However, his health declined rapidly due to throat cancer. On June 10, 2002, John Gotti died at the age of 61 in prison. John Gotti's legacy is a controversial one. While he was one of the most famous and charismatic mafia bosses in history, his recklessness and thirst for fame ultimately led to his downfall. His public persona attracted law enforcement attention, and his high-profile lifestyle violated traditional mafia codes. Unlike Carlo Gambino, who ruled the mafia from the shadows, Gotti's arrogance made him an easy target for the FBI. His leadership ultimately weakened the mafia, leading to multiple arrests and prosecutions that dismantled the Gambino family's power. Though he is still idolized in popular culture, his reign marked the beginning of the end for the traditional Cosa Nostra structure in America.